Go ahead and get started. Good morning, evening, and afternoon, everyone, depending on your time zone, and thank you for joining us. We are so excited to restart this webinar series for the fall. Before we get started, the Q&A feature is enabled, so if at any point during this talk you have questions, feel free to use that, and we'll have time for questions at the end. Closed captioning feature is also enabled, so also feel free to turn that on if you wish. So without further ado, I want to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Philipp Ruprecht. Dr. Ruprecht is joining us from the University of Nevada, Reno, where he combines fieldwork and petrological and geochemical studies on volcanic areas to understand the magmatic processes within the crust and upper mantle that drive volcanic eruptions and the formation of continental crust. While he and his group studies volcanoes from around the world, much of his research focuses on the Andes. So we are thrilled to have him with us today and hope you enjoy his talk on the Puyehue-Cordon Caulle Volcanic Complex in Chile. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic along to you.
Thanks, Juliet. Let me just share my screen so everyone can see that. Let me just get this a little bit here. All right. Yeah, thanks, Juliet. I hope everyone can hear me and see me and see the slides. Thanks for organizing this webinar series, and I'm happy to give a little update of the work we have been doing in southern Chile in the past, what is going on right now, and also what is there in the future for the next few years. I want to share some kind of opportunities potentially for people interested in collaboration in the long term. I think Cordon Caulle, the Puyehue-Cordon Caulle Volcanic Complex is a really exciting place to look at the links between a variety of problems, and especially in the context of SZ4D, I think it's one of the special places where we can truly link megathrusts to arc volcanoes to surface processes. If you have to pinpoint an eruption that may have been triggered by a megathrust earthquake, I think the 1960 eruption that occurred within 2 days of the largest ever recorded earthquake is a good example of the far field interactions between the trench and potentially volcanic activity. What I want to focus on mostly today, though, is the more recent eruption. There was one in 2011, 2012 that we have been focusing on that is interesting in the context of hazards that are localized, but also regional. And I will first start to give you a little overview of what we know about the larger magmatic system, and then actually focus in on some really exciting features associated with this eruption, which is a shallow intrusion that has been reported a few years or 8 years ago that we're now taking on for the next few years to really take a careful look at it. So let's just get a little orientation going. So this is the southern volcanic zone of the Andes. Or a part of it, and you can see Cordon Caulle sits towards the southern end of it, and aside from that, you see some of the other recent and historic eruptions that are large and or frequent in this part of the arc. So Cordon Caulle is one of a number of erupting volcanoes in this region. It is special in the sense that it is quite evolved and that it had a number of eruptions in the last 100 years. 1921, 22, 1960, 2011, and 2011, 2012. Of course, the far field effects of this eruption are felt mostly in Argentina. You can see the plume here from that most recent eruption, basically spreading across some parts of the South American continent. And again, to the left, you can see some of the rupture that or the area of the rupture that occurred during the 1960 megathrust earthquake, to give you a sense of some of these regional processes. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So as I said, I want to focus on the 2011-2012 eruption. It was an eruption that was not just Plinian in nature, but had a substantial lava flow, an effusive episode that followed that Plinian eruption. You can see it here as a major lava flow field that is about a cubic kilometer or more in volume that erupted. You can see that some of these arms are wrapping around. Maybe I should put my pointer on. You can see that some of these lava flows wrap around into this Nilawu River valley. They are basically flowing around what is this shallow intrusion or laccolith that we will focus on in the second half of the talk. On the lower left, you see that while the 1960 eruption with its lavas that also had Plinian deposits associated with it, that was much more like a fissure eruption. This general area is like a elevated graben system, and on the southern side, you can see definitely that these eruptive vents were all aligned, while this more recent eruption is a point source, both for both styles of eruption. And then the 1921-22 eruption is to the northwest of here, just to give you some sense. I have no scale on this picture, but you'll see a scale on this one to get a broader region here into context. You can see the 1921-22 now over here. This entire region of the Puyehue-Cordon Caulle Volcanic Complex is this kind of northwest-southeast aligned graben system with elevated topography on the southern end and the northern end. But then there is substantial topography to the north into the Nilawu River, which is actually quite useful, and I'll get into that in a bit. The eruption has I think taken has gotten a lot of attention for its transitionary period, and there is numerous papers that I won't be able to get into in detail right now. But as this eruption transitioned from explosive to effusive, hybrid activity started to emerge, and you can see this as lower energy ash plumes that you see in the lower right that have been discussed in various papers that are potentially associated with this transition, how you can actually degas the magmas and transition into a drier and calmer effusive eruption. And so this is some of the questions that we want to get after as well. So this is a recent overflight a few years back, gives you a sense of this actually vent region. I need to turn off the pointer. To give you a sense of the landscape, which is wild out there, with lots and lots of faulting as a result of this shallow intrusion. Some of these cracks are substantial, with large, potentially tens of meters deep. So walking around has to be done with some care. You can see the vast sea of lava in the back associated with the 2011-2012 eruption. And as we kind of come around the vent area, you see a flow lobe that is coming down towards the Nilawu River that is basically exploiting the large relief in this part of the region. In the back, you have the stratovolcano of Puyehue. So it's a spectacular field area with lots and lots of processes that we are interested to understand, especially near surface, between the links between the magmatic system and the surface response. I will go down, explain some of that in a second. Let me just get back to my pointer. All right. So before we do that, though, I want to give you a quick rundown of the lead up and the kind of processes that occurred prior to the actual 2011-2012 eruption, and then the post-eruptive episode as well. On the left-hand side, you just see another of these overview maps with the different recent flows that highlighted in blue, yellow, and then the grayish 2011-2012. This is work from, or it's from Diego Lobos's work that I'll talk about in a second. What we know from the system before the eruption is that there was actually already substantial pre-eruptive deformation in this region, mostly coming from INSAR data. And that there was a large amount of inflation that it was extending over a large area of more than about 10 kilometers, right? So this has been interpreted as a large sill body that was potentially recharging this region. Whether there's deeper sources is unknown, but this is currently the way we think about this system. This pre-eruptive deformation, of course, was then kind of interrupted by the eruption itself. The eruption led to substantial subsidence in the region, and shortly after that Plinian eruption came to an end and lava extrusion was starting, you were also starting to see towards the end of that a reinflation of that entire region. So these are now time slices between 2012 and 2019, and you can see that inflation occurred over the course of this entire 10-year period. And the thing to highlight here is that where the inflation occurred, in both cases, before the eruption and after the eruption, is not aligned with the location of the actual vent and eruptive site in 2011, 2012, right? So there is likely some lateral flow that we have to accommodate in order for this eruption to be fed from these kind of deformation sources that are visible here. The type of the amplitude of deformation, or the amount of deformation that we see, is substantial and is rivaled only with in a few places around the globe. You can see that initially the reinflation was on the order of tens of centimeters per year for quite some time. That has slowly died off, but even today there is continues to be inflation and on the order of about 2 centimeters per year. And recent eruptive or recent seismic swarms have kept this system generally at yellow levels by the Sennacher mean. So we understand that the system has a relatively large, laterally extensive system, at least based on geodesy. And petrology basically has confirmed or is thinking of similar models. These are past studies from Castro and Seropian et al. That are highlighting phase equilibria and petrology of the erupted rhyolite suggests a relatively shallow storage, somewhere around 150 megapascals. That's where the rhyolite was stored prior to eruption, and that potentially a large mushy system is responsible for that broad deformation feature, with individual eruptions being potentially tapped from smaller melt rich or crystal poor parts. And that is basically currently the consensus model. Other workers that have mostly worked on INSAR and other petrology data, such as volatile estimates, have also suggested a relatively shallow and laterally extensive reservoir. What we have done recently to add to the story is really understanding what kind of mush we are dealing with. This is work from Heather Winslow, who defended her PhD a year ago, and she worked on mafic enclaves that we found and reported for the first time from this lava field that initially, were thought to be potentially trigger mechanisms. But as we were looking closer and closer into the nature of these mafic enclaves, they clearly point into a different direction. They are potentially supporting evidence that there is really a mushy system underneath. These are coarsely crystalline mafic enclaves. You can see quite large crystals that are all intergrown very tightly, and the vesicles that are present in these crystal-rich enclaves are all irregular shaped, so these vesicles had to kind of form when there was a crystal network already present. And so we have gone and interpreted those as pieces of this mush that is potentially feeding these rhyolite eruptions. And I think the texture argument is pretty strong. We primarily find these coarsely crystalline types of enclaves that you see on the left, and only rarely do we see actually only 2 enclaves at all in the entire hours that we have looked in this area have we seen something that is more consistent with a melt-dominated porphyritic texture, where we have plagioclase, olivine phenocrysts, and a fine matrix, and bubbles that are actually round, suggesting that they could expand into a liquid. So what we think here is that the majority of these mafic pieces are a representation of this mush, and we can explore with them the formation of rhyolites in general in this area, but also maybe potentially provide an end member case of how we get from a basaltic mantle-derived melt to a rhyolite. What Heather did, she looked carefully at the chemistry of these enclaves, and they are among the most mafic and most primitive compositions in all of the southern Andes, with over 8% MgO and Mg numbers that are 65 and sometimes a little higher even. So they're really on the primitive end, something that you would suspect is basically mantle-derived. So we don't think that they have a lot of processing going on in the crust before they actually are producing this mafic mush. And when we are starting to look at the melt chemistry inside these enclaves, this is shown here by these blue and light teal kind of colors. These are glass compositions that you can see in the enclaves of the Cordon Caulle compared to the rhyolite itself that brought these enclaves to the surface, and they are basically identical. So we argued in our recent work that this is maybe one end member where you can see differentiation is really efficient from rhyolite, from quite primitive basalts to rhyolite in a single crystallization episode at shallow levels. To the lower left, you can basically see that comparison of the glass now for these various kinds of major elements, and that there is a good match for most of these elements. And trace elements are supporting that argument as well. In black, you see in the spider diagram, you see the mafic enclaves, and then in blue and purple are the interstitial glass of the enclaves and the rhyolites that basically are demonstrating a very much the same geochemical signature. So we have argued that this is a single episode or a single step of differentiation from basalt to rhyolite. We have since tried to support this with thermodynamic modeling using melts, and colleagues from Vanderbilt that we are working on right now to confirm that really in order to get to these rhyolitic compositions, you need shallow pressures and very dry conditions of maybe not more than 8% of water. And that is further supported if we are looking, we have been doing phase equilibrium experiments recently in Hanover with our colleagues there that also suggest that it is low pressures of not more than 150 megapascals and less than 1% of water, or about 1% of water, is necessary in order to recreate the mineral assemblage and mineral abundances that we see in these mafic enclaves. And we do see the same kind of textural features that are common in these enclaves. For example, these peritictic reactions associated with olivine and OPX rims. So there is a lot of petrologic evidence now that is supporting such a shallow mush system, and that this shallow mush system may in fact be basaltic primarily, but producing rhyolitic eruptions. So this is in many ways an interesting kind of end member for that context. So we have come up with a schematic model that looks a little bit like this, dominated by a mafic mush. We are, previous schematics have extended this mush maybe even further laterally. The question how the system is actually interacting with the Puyehue-Cordon volcano itself remains a question that we are not addressing right now, but I think it's an interesting question in the future. And we have basically a basaltic mush that gets replenished by some kind of steady state melt percolation of rhyolitic melt being extracted from this mush that then feeds these rhyolitic eruptions. And mafic recharge is a rather rare, if ever, visible process. At least we have, as I said, only seen 2 mafic enclaves that are consistent with such a process. So that puts Cordon Caulle into a very much into an end member situation. And this is a compilation that Heather did to basically explore how how much compositional variability exists in mafic enclave evolved host magma pairs. And you can see that the compositional gap that we see at Cordon Caulle is among the largest we see globally, and only other places that are also potentially associated with some kind of extensional environment are consistent with that kind of large composition gap, such as Medicine Lake in the Cascades or the coastal volcanic field that is nowadays in the Owens Valley. So we have petrologic evidence, we have INSAR evidence that suggests this shallow magmatic system. Whether this is a mush, we wanted to test this in another way. And this is work out of our collaborators from Rice, with Patrick Phelps being the primary person working on this. We wanted to explore whether, if there is a crystal mush that is responding to the dynamic pressure changes associated with eruption, whether we can actually explain the deformation features that we see post-eruptive in response to poroelastic processes, basically like a sponge that expands and it contracts, and fluids are moving in and out of that kind of network as a response to pressure changes. And so what Patrick did was a poroelastic model to look at the kind of geometry that you see on the left-hand side. And as pressure is decreased due to an eruption, you will have potentially an upward segregation of that interstitial melt following that kind of eruption, which then leads to a rebound or a surface uplift in response to that. And so he implemented such a model to see whether this surface deformation is consistent with such a mushy behavior. And short, just basically to summarize that, yes, of course, there is a large number of knobs that one can use, but if one stays within the parameter space that is reasonable for these mushy systems in terms of porosity, permeability, bubble fraction, melt viscosity, we can actually match the deformation signal very well with such poroelastic processes, further supporting the presence potentially of a large laterally extensive mush system. All right, so this is what we have been working on in the past and continue to work in the future as well, in terms of what are the run-ups to that 2011-2012 eruption? How is the largest system changing since that eruption? And what I want to focus on for the second half of this talk is now taking a more detailed look at this vent area where we have this shallow intrusion that was dubbed the laccolith in 2016 by Castro, who reported on this surface deformation about 8 years ago. And it's a fascinating landscape. It's a fascinating natural laboratory that now we are exploring in much greater detail with a larger 5-year NSF program that I will share with you in a second. So this shallow intrusion formed basically during the eruption itself. Shortly after the onset of the plane eruption on June 4th, you start to potentially see surface deformation that must have occurred somewhere between June 8th and then July 3rd of that same year, which led to an emplacement of maybe about a 200-meter deep intrusion that led to a similar level of uplift. And in the lower left side, you can see basically two profiles across this laccolith area, and you can see the substantial surface changes associated with this intrusion. So today, this continues to be of course, an area of large surface heat flow. Temperatures are at about 80 degrees Celsius in various regions, just a few tens of centimeters below the surface. We take advantage of that geothermal energy whenever we are working out in the field to create our cordon chicken. After a few hours, we have some nice dinner or lunch prepared. On rainy days, we have also done other types of cooking, and I think we will experiment over the next few years with potentially an ever-increasing complexity of recipes. But yes, so there is a lot of geothermal energy in that system associated with this laccolith, but also with the larger magmatic system. This has always been known as a very large hydrothermal system in the Southern Andes. So with that, I want to kind of now take the rest of the time to introduce you to the work we are currently doing and we will be doing in the next few years that is focused directly on the laccolith itself. The goal that we have is threefold. We want to better understand how these kinds of shallow emplacements of magma actually come to be, how they may actually be related to conduit processes and to the modulation of the eruptive style. We want to understand the current state of this shallow magma body, and in terms of density, hydrothermal, its structure, and how it ultimately leads to mass and heat loss potentially through rivers. And of course, this entire landscape has been resurfaced, not just once, but actually twice or three times in the last 100 years. So how this landscape is responding to these resurfacing events and the different kinds of environments that are created as a result of different types of eruptive products is a goal in this study as well. And in the long run, of course, this has implications for geohazards. We're working closely with Cernajemin to communicate our observations, our results. Down the Nilagua River, there are communities that are basically looking up towards a large hot body that potentially can fail, and therefore we want to understand its stability over time. So these are some of the questions that I'm not going to all read that we want to address. We want to primarily understand its internal structure. There is subsidence, and I will talk about this in a second, that we notice already with this laccolith now over the last few years. And what is its rate? Are there changes in space and time? Can we identify pathways between the bigger magma reservoir and the laccolith that still exists, potentially through a hydrothermal system? I think the hydrothermal system is very important in many other ways as well, because it does tell us or has of course important information about the connections at depth between different kinds of parts of the system. We want to understand the deformation history and the long-term stability of this landscape. And then lastly, I think this is a really interesting area also to understand how seasonal effects are affecting such a shallow magmatic system and magma body. This area is among the area with the largest precipitation during winter times, several thousands of millimeters per year of precipitation coming down, especially in the winter months, and understanding how that seasonality potentially affects this laccolith and other parts of the system is of interest as well. We approach this with a quite dense and varied array of tools. I understand this is a busy figure and potentially a little too much to get into great detail for today. Generally speaking, you can see to the right, we have already collected high-resolution drone-based visual data and DEMs so that we can use that for all sorts of goals to explore the different sectors of this laccolith and how it may change, how it may be stable or not so stable in certain parts. We have different kinds of campaign style geophysical tools, whether it's gravity. We are looking at magnetic surveys, as well as gas chemistry. And then, of course, focusing on the surface evolution, both out of space as well as looking at it through field observations on the ground. Just to name a few of these things that we want to actually explore. In the end, just to give you some of that impression about the hazards that are associated with this, this is sitting at about 400 meters relief above this valley. Fortunately, this valley makes a curve, which would make an impact on any kind of hazard associated with a failure. But understanding its internal structure, of course, and changes through time are relevant for that hazard question. This is Heather enjoying the view somewhere halfway up that laccolith. So we're not even at the top. This is now an ongoing project, and I'm sure many of you guys are parts of these numerous Zoom meetings that we have had now, going back all the way to 2021, which has now grown to a pretty large group of people involved. On the order of 30 people are close or tightly or not so tightly involved in research associated with our project. Students are already graduating, and students have are starting up research in this area, and there's more to come, obviously. In the lower part, you see our field team from this January, February. We were a total of 16 people with a good mix of senior and junior people, as well as US and Chile-based scientists on this team. So we are we will enjoy a few more seasons with this large group. Here you could get a little bit of a sense of the types of people involved and the kinds of questions or the types of expertise that we will tap into. And you can also see that there is some kind of community involvement that I will talk about towards the end. So what are some of the first results that are coming out of this work? Diego Aloas recently published an update of what we think the laccolith area actually and volume actually is compared to the earlier study from 2016. We think it is much more restricted in terms of its region where that uplift occurred. That is also much more consistent with the geothermal surface expressions that we have. We can both use satellite or remote sensing techniques, as well as, of course, work on the ground to study the rapid incision of these unconsolidated Plinian fall deposits that are substantial. And this, what you see here, is all 2011, 2012 Plinian deposits from these spots in the map where it says A and B in the red stars. So and we're not reaching the base of these deposits here, but you can see a lot has been already traveled down. And of course, landscape evolution has been studied specifically in the context of the Pinatubo eruption in 1991. But I think what we will be able to do with our surface processes studies that we're doing in these areas, we of course bring completely new technologies to bear in terms of understanding the processes of mass transport in this region, which will be exciting to understand how these landscapes evolve. This laccolith is not stable, at least not in terms of its surface elevation. What Diego also showed in his recent work is that there has been some subsidence since its emplacement, especially that subsidence was shortly after the eruption. And you can see on the right-hand side, which is showing in blue and red, the relative amount of subsidence relative to its uplift, that the areas of subsidence are not uniform across the entire area, but that there are segmentations within this laccolith. So understanding this internal structure becomes even more important. We can see that surface thermal expressions are not uniform across that region. In fact, we can combine that with our visual data sets to understand where the hotspots are and how they relate to potentially faulting and deformation of this laccolith and how that may translate into the subsurface. So this is a thermal map that we created in 2022. And to the left, you see some of these visual spots associated with these hotspots. See what is the timing. All right, I need to speed up a little bit. We've repeated this thermal imaging just this last January, February, and you can see that this is a very consistent and basically stable geothermal feature that we see here. But if you look carefully, don't focus so much on the amplitudes here of the thermal signal that may have various reasons for that. But if you actually compare regions that have become brighter or hotter or colder, there are a few features that are starting to emerge. And so a time series of this area will be interesting to understand which areas are going to cool down more, which ones are more affected by these seasonal impacts of precipitation, and which areas are potentially more isolated. Oops. Just a little maybe teaser at this point. Joe Biasi, who's at the University of Wyoming, is one of our PIs. He has been putting out some continuous magnetometers onto this area to explore the time series in terms of magnetic signals. What you see here is very preliminary data. But what you can also see is that this preliminary data, again, suggests that there is a segmentation associated with this laccolith, and Joe has made a good point why magnetic surveys and continuous data sets are going to be very useful in monitoring and understanding near surface processes associated with magmatic systems. And so he has been deploying these across the globe, and we're excited to have him as part of our team at Cordon Caulle as well. The surface is constantly changing in this area. To the right, you see a video, or you saw a video of a stream that is re-emerging out of this tephra deposit. This stream itself is 40 degrees Celsius hot. So thermal discharge or heat discharge from the laccolith and maybe the deeper system can be measured. And the great thing is that most of that heat is funneled into the Nilawe River, this one major drainage from that elevated graben area. And we collected thermal data on that Nilawe River, or one of the tributaries, in the early 2000s, late 2010s. And you can see the substantial impact that the seasonality, of course, has on that heat flow, and that there is substantial heat being transported out over the last few years. I will finish with some work that we've been doing. I think that brings us back to where I started, the transition of explosive to effusive eruptions. This is Josh Puyehue, recently graduated from University of Oregon, where he and a couple of us have worked on the tephra record that is proximal, that has not been really studied at all for this eruption. And I think that proximal record provides some exciting understanding of this transition period from explosive to effusive. So we dug a bunch of holes. Not all of them are as deep as this one, and we didn't dig this one, obviously. This is a pit crater that is also, these are also common in the area that I don't want to talk about right now, but there's all sorts of amazing geomorphic features that we are exploring. So we have been working with a lot of energy on the latest tephra deposits associated with this eruption that we think are associated with that transitionary ash venting period. And you can see that these previously undescribed late tephra deposits are very laminated, very nicely layered. that really represent potentially small little venting episodes that are varying in vigor. And have mapped this out and characterized these deposits now and are about to submit a manuscript hopefully soon. The material that is coming out is, of course, pumice obsidian class that suggests that there is these deposits are telling us something also about the degassing mechanisms of these eruptions that then help us to understand the transition from explosive to effusive eruptions. We have done extensive work. Over 100 sections have been dug by us in this region. We are happy that this extension and deformation at the surface has helped us with some of this digging, because otherwise we would probably be still digging. But you can see there is beautiful tephra deposits that are still available and that probably in 10, 20 years are largely gone by the surface evolution post-eruption. These layers are quite easy to correlate across the field. So they really represent some kind of local but uniform process, where we have marker beds that are, or marker layers that are coming back over and over again, such as these areas of more fine triple ash, what we sometimes refer to as triple ashes in the field, that are visible in all sorts of pits that we dug in this area. And I'll just jump over this. So this is now just one of the results. Of course, you can see that ultimately the deposits are localized to the vent area, and most of that has not been really recognized in prior tephra studies because most of that prior work was not as proximal as we have been working on in the last few years. And you can see that while volumetrically this is a small contribution to the overall eruption, it may hold, on the other hand, a very important record in understanding that explosive effusive record. So with that, I'll have a couple more slides to highlight a few things that I think are relevant for the SC4D community. Of course, with that initiative, we are trying to change some of the culture of how we do science. And I'm myself part of the Collective Impact Committee currently. So one thing that the SC4D wants is, of course, bringing in potentially, or well, having multiple benefits of research that is done in the field, and so not just limiting that to maybe the PIs, but to a larger community. And so what we want to do in the next few years, and so this is a call for everyone to be aware of, is that in summer 25, 26, 27, we will basically invite or request interest in joining us in the field, participating in the field seasons of 26, 27, and 28, to bring primarily students into the field with us, to be part of that team, to take advantage of our logistical support that we have built up by that point, and hopefully to complement the research that we are already doing. So make sure that you're aware for the look out for this in the coming months and years. We hope to bring in new ideas as well, and basically open up our activities to a larger community. We're doing abundant outreach in this area that has been, I hope, I think quite fruitful in the last few years. We mostly partner with the Fundación Huilo Huilo, which is actually not near Cordon Caulle, but the volcano to the north, which is Mocho Xosuenco. We've been working there for now, I don't know, up to 5-6 years, to do school activities, to run summer camps. And we have brought in our colleagues from Senapred and Senageomin that then have educated the local kids and families about some of the hazards that they are living with. And I think some of that has been really successful, because I think some of these connections have been deepened because of our activities that have brought in, have helped to really bridge the communication between some of the Senageomin colleagues and the local community. And lastly, I want to highlight, just make a little announcement. If you are a PhD student interested in more landscape evolution, there is a project waiting for you, working with Joel Scheingross here at the University of Nevada, Reno, who's a co-PI on the project. So please contact him. You can contact me as well if you want to learn more about it. We'd be happy to talk about you. And the same from my side is I'm looking for a postdoc that is doing all sorts of research aspects associated with this system, mostly asking questions of emplacement for this shallow intrusion and the transition of this eruptive behavior. But also that person hopefully can have additional research ideas to be developed in the context of being out there with us. So I hope I could give you a nice summary of why this Cordon Caulle magmatic system is so fascinating. It is a place that had numerous eruptions, or 3 eruptions in the last 100 years. The bigger system maybe really represents an interesting end member in the context of the formation of rhyolite and being produced potentially straight out of basalt. It is the best example in the world, I think, that we can use to understand far-field triggering mechanisms such as a megathrust earthquake. We have obviously a very dynamic landscape that is basically on steroids, changing as we can see those changes with our eyes on a daily basis, basically. And so this is what motivated us to work there in the next few years. And so this is what we're working on. As I mentioned, there is lots of questions that are hopefully also helping us to understand cryptodomes and other domes elsewhere, and to understand processes, conduit processes associated with the magma supply and delivery to the surface, because I think we have some unique records of this eruption. And lastly, just a big thanks to just the team that already is present and large and growing. There's not, I don't want to name everyone. Tentatively, we call this the Chilco project. The Chilco is a beautiful local or regional plan that you can see here that reminds me at least of the laccolith sitting right in purple here underneath the leaves. And so it's the Caulle hazards and their interplays during laccolith continuous observations. And lastly, I also, of course, want to thank NSF for the support we've gotten over the years, and various logistical help members that have helped us getting into the field and do all the cool stuff we're doing out there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was very informative, and I hope everyone can give you a warm round of virtual applause. We already have one question in the chat, and I encourage all of our participants to feel free to submit your own questions. So I'll go ahead and read it from Karen Bemis. Has your group planned to do eruption modeling to predict tephra fault deposits?
Yeah, so that we do have colleagues in Oregon and Rice that are interested in understanding the conduit, at least the conduit part, not necessarily what is happening outside of the vent, if that's what you're interested in as well.
Thank you. We have another question from Gareth Fabro. Have you done any diffusion modeling to get timescales?
We have, and this is work that is on my desk right now to be moved forward. Heather Winslow in her PhD has done some interesting work to understand the engagement of these enclaves into the rhyolite and on what timescales that may happen. We have a variety of timescales associated with plagioclase and olivine. So yes, this is already happening, but please stay tuned for that.
Great, thank you. We have another question from Andres Tessera. Great talk, Philip. Thank you so much. A general question from a non-petrologist. How is it explained that the fractionation of rhyolite from a basalt without intermediate terms? Is this a generally accepted model?
I mean, it is typically we think that is happening in stages, right? We have our, view of a transcrustal system where magmas are processed in multiple stages to move into more evolved compositions. But I think this really represents an end member, and in extensional environments, these more bimodal compositions are common, and this is of course not truly extensional in the context of plate tectonics, but it is an area where maybe dry magmas can rise more easily to the surface, and near the surface can, because of the cold nature of the crust there, fractionate very far down the path, and so that's why we are having at least a mechanism to get from basalt to rhyolite in a very in a single step. I'm not saying that is how rhyolite happens all the time, but it is basically that end member that I think is worthwhile to recognize.
Thank you. And then a question from Sebastian Garcia. Does the project plan to do outreach activities within Argentina?
Not yet, but I think if there are relatively easy ways to communicate with Argentinian communities, I'd be happy to hear what ideas are there. Of course, there's always resources that need to be seen if that's possible, but I think it would be interesting because of course this Cordon Caulle eruption had a major impact on the Argentinian communities. In fact, when I do my work in Neltume with the outreach there, which is 50, 60 kilometers to the north, not in the main path of ash supply, people there very vividly remember the 2011, 2012 eruption as well, and because it was definitely felt in terms of ash deposits there.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions. Oh, one more question from Andres. Any reason for not including GNSS and seismic monitoring into the geophysical aspects? Seismicity is still very active, and it should give you a nice image of current activity, mostly in relation with active faults.
GNSS, and sorry, I have definitely not, I've skipped over, I'm sure, many details. GNSS is part of our efforts. Seismicity, while I agree, especially understanding earthquake locations would be really exciting, and there is some work that is going to be done there. We are not putting out extra instruments, if that's what you're wondering, and that's that has logistical backgrounds and so on, and cost in the end that drove that decision. But
Great,
seismicity
thanks.
in general will be, is part of our general scope of what we want to look at, and GNSS is actually an active component.
Perfect. Thanks. We have one last question from Eileen Gaete. Many thanks for the talk. The 1960 and 2011-2012 eruptions are different. Do you think the eruption's location could have also influenced the eruption style? The 2011 eruption occurred during the intersection of the Cordon and Lequeño-Ofqui faults.
Yeah, the Lequeño-Ofqui fault zone is of course kind of coming down right there where the 2011 eruption site is, and that may have helped with focusing, if that's what you're wondering. And I think that hopefully we can actually address that question in the future. But at this point, I would just speculate. But I think it's a worthwhile question that you're raising.
Thank you very much. We at SC4D have a busy morning and have a meeting right after this. So if you have any more questions or comments or want to reach out to Philip, feel free to do so directly, or always feel free to reach out to SC4D and we can pass along any message. Thank you so much for joining, and a recording of this talk will be on our YouTube later today, so feel free to give it another watch if you want. And many thanks again to Philip for joining us this morning and giving such a wonderful talk.
Thanks as well, and thanks for everyone for attending.
Thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.